Hi everyone, it's Kim from the Shamrock Quilt Studio, and I'm here today with a quick Christmas project that we can tackle and have done very quickly. So let's get started and see what we've got. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Well, hi there. I've got a project for you for Christmas, and this is going to be a quick one that you can really knock out very quickly and easily, and I think you'll be able to squeeze it in and have no problem. The other thing is it doesn't take very many materials. It's probably something, if you've got a little bit of a quilting stash, that you can draw from your quilting stash to get started. So let me tell you about it. First of all, let me say that I have been so encouraged by the response to our Christmas quilt, Deck the Halls, that I felt like I needed another project just to keep us rolling along. And this is one that kind of came to me out of the blue, and I threw together really quickly, and it's just cute as a button. So let's get started, shall we? This project is going to be for a small table runner, and our base material I have cut at, let me get the exact measurements for you, 15 by 44. So that's one width of fabric, 15 inches. Now, what did I use? I'm trying to use what's in my stash. So you can do the same, or you can purchase materials for this. For mine, I had a piece of muslin that I used. Now, I could have also used a piece of cotton, or just maybe like we usually use, the So Classic material from Joann's, and then there's also a store brand white cotton fabric from Hobby Lobby that you could use along with any other fabric. And if you chose to do this on a patterned background, that would be fine too. That would make it truly your own. So I've cut this fabric 15 by 44. Now, if you're doing the backing for this quilt, because we're 15 inches wide, we should be right at about a half a yard. So if you're looking for something for your backing, let's say you wanted to purchase something for your backing to make it unique, we're only looking about a half a yard, so very inexpensively. Now, what this design is it's a string of Christmas lights. And what I started with was just a drawing of the old-fashioned, I think they're called C9 bulbs. You know those old-fashioned Christmas bulbs that were big and they were on your tree? If you remember years and years ago, before the little mini twinkle lights were fashionable or available, we had the big bright Christmas lights on the tree. And thinking back on that, to me, that really is that old-fashioned Christmas. So that's what I used as the basis for this pattern. So I drew up a little sketch of the Christmas lights, and I'm calling this design Sugarplum lights. Now, I have seen some similar kind of designs out there by doing a Google search. So there may be a pattern that's similar to this, but this is my drawing of these lights. So in that regard, I think this is unique and original. So I drew this little shape, and it's kind of a modified triangle with rounded edges to give us the shape of that light. And then I've got a little tiny, what would we call it? Almost like a little square, rectangle, cylinder kind of shape that's going to be the electrical socket for that light bulb. And then we're going to use for the electrical cord a 1/4 inch bias strip. Now, I've got a lot to say about this when we get to this point of the project, so be sure to tune in for that. So I cut out from my stash 12 light bulbs, and I used a piece of heat-proof mylar because I was making 12 of them and I wanted them all to be exactly the same. Let me turn my iron on because I'm going to show you how to do that here shortly. So then this is the pattern for just the bulb. And I'm going to demonstrate how we make that. Let me get my stuff all settled and I'll show you. While we're waiting for the iron to heat up, let me just tell you a little bit about the fabrics I used. I had a bunch of fabrics in my stash that were bright colors, almost a neon quality. And those were really good because it actually made the light look like it was on and glowing. So if you look at some of these, here's a pink one, here's a yellow one, that they look really bright, they're happy, they're cheerful, and that's exactly the look we're going after. And then there were a couple that have patterns on them, but they were still in those happy, bright colors. Again, I'm trying to use things in my stash. There are 12 light bulbs. I have 12 different fabrics. You could use fewer fabrics. You could use fewer colors. I think I have 6 different color families and 12 lights. So I've got like 2 reds, 2 blues, 2 purples, so forth. You could choose to do them all the same color if you wanted to. That's truly, truly up to you. And then what we're going to do is I cut this mylar template and we're just going to put that on that mylar template. And I'm using a starch-based liquid that I'm applying with a brush. And we've used this for a couple of different projects. So if you followed some of the applique things we're doing, you are already ahead of the game in knowing how this works. Now I found with the other ones that I had to put it on and wait for it just a little bit to soak in. So then let's talk about the little socket. Well, I don't know what you call that, a socket, but it's the screw-in part of the bulb. And we used that other piece. Here's one out of cardboard that you might can see a little bit better. And we did the same thing with that. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and put the starch on that as well, so we can just really buzz through this pretty quickly. So while we're waiting on that, we can get started on our light. So let's make sure we're lined up here and we have what we need in camera view. And we've got our iron. And yes, ma'am, it's getting hot. So then what we're going to do is we're going to fold this fabric over and we're going to just kind of walk some gathers or some folds in there. The more they're like gathers, the smoother the line is going to be. So there we go. And this really does come together really quickly. I sat down the night that I thought of this and drew up the pattern, and I had 3 or 4 of these lights together really within about an hour, hour and a half at most. And I had the process down as far as how to make them, how to make that little electrical piece fit together with it so that we had something that went together quickly. So it's going to be a process of getting these together, but I don't think it's going to take you very long at all. So let's just give that just another minute. We want it nice and dry. And I think I'm just going to show you one because I want you to see just how quickly it goes together. So there's the light bulb. And then let's do the little electrical piece here. Now this has rounded corners on 2 sides and then right angles on the other 2. We're not going to fold this part down. You could choose to if you want to, but we're just going to slip it right up underneath the bulb. So we're only going to be worried about getting it down and around that template on 3 sides. I have seen some patterns where they used straight lines to create these bulbs. I didn't find that they were quite as realistic looking, and I was really going for that authenticity in the design because I really wanted them to evoke that look and that feeling of the old-fashioned lights. Okay, so look at that. How quick was that? And we already have one bulb and one of the little electric piece ready, and we're just going to slip that under there about 1/4 of an inch, and there's our bulb. Just that fast. It amazed me how quickly that could come together and how much it looked like a Christmas bulb, really. So that's the way we make those. And then the only other thing you're going to need 12 of these, one for each bulb, plus 2 more. And I'm going to show you what you're going to use those extra 2 for. And then you're going to need the bias tape. And I would say you probably need about 60 inches total. You could do a little bit less, but just to be sure, I do about 60 inches. It doesn't have to be in one contiguous piece, but you're going to need some shorter pieces and some longer pieces. And I find with the bias tape that my pet peeve with it is that, especially these little ones, you make them and they look perfect and then you leave them. If you don't get them on your design right away, they tend to unfold on you. And then you've got this half pressed, half unpressed piece of bias that's just difficult to work with. So then you find yourself trying to crease back in those folds, and it's almost impossible to catch both sides at the same time. So you're pressing down one side, you're pressing down the other side, you've got one side that works, one side that doesn't work. It can really be a pain. And I've tried different methods for doing this. I've tried the bias tape maker, the metal ones, where you feed it in and it folds it and then you press as it comes out. I've tried the, I don't see it here, the plastic ones, Pauline, I think it's Pauline's Quilting World, if I got that right, where it's just 2 little holes in a heat-proof piece of plastic. In fact, I can show you some others while I'm thinking about it. They're sashers is what they're called. Now this is not the 1/4 inch, that's a 1/2 inch. But it's that piece of plastic, and you feed it in one side and feed it out the other side, and you press as it goes along. They all work really well, but especially that 1/4 inch bias tape, for some reason, just doesn't hold its shape very well. Then, that was my iron. Then somebody asked, and I don't recall what video it was on or who it was, but they asked about putting this adhesive. It's double-sided adhesive tape, and it's made for 1/4 inch bias. So I tried that on this project, and I got probably 60 to 75% of all the bias tape onto the project the way I wanted it, with it taped down, and realized that the tape did not curve like the bias tape was capable of doing. The tape was not capable of doing that, even after you remove the paper liner. So I had to take it all out and then glue it in place. And I found that gluing it in place was the easiest and most efficient way to do that. Now, speaking of gluing, this isn't quite dry. We're going to go ahead and take this out. And I think we'll press this down because we don't want to lose that shape. And you could do this with a regular size iron, especially as large as these pieces are. For demonstration purposes, I just find that the little one is better. And you might find if you use a really strong starch solution that you get a little bit of starch residue on your pieces. You can just kind of scrape that away or brush it away. Now we've got these two pieces and we're going to hook them together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little bit of glue right up here. Whoops. Come on out. Come on, there you go. A little bit of glue. And then we're just going to lay this piece about 1/4 of an inch in the middle. You could measure it out if you wanted to, but I don't know that it's really necessary. And that's going to be that piece. So there's one more done. And we're just going to set that aside to dry and to cool down and be ready when we're ready. Now I have a few more of these to do, but I wanted to show you a little bit about the design I used kind of to pull this together. And we'll go over the bias in a little more detail, pros and cons about what to use, how to get it in place. But we're going to have just a string that we're going to attach these lights to. And here we go. There it is. Now this one, I've already placed these. I used some applique glue to hold them where I wanted them. And when I decided where they were going, I had these here so that I could see right where it needed to start and where it needed to end. And you can see here how I've used really small pieces, medium-sized pieces, and then some of them are quite a bit longer. That one's probably a foot long. And then there's a couple others that are really long as well. Now, you can choose to make the design of this electrical cord anything you wanted to. I wanted something that was a little messy, but wasn't a complete mess. And that's usually, you know, when you think about lights for your Christmas decorations, usually that cord gets all tangled up. So you wanted a little bit of playfulness of that, but you didn't want it to look like it was just an absolute mess. So then these are going to be placed right here in these slots. And you would choose your colors however you wanted them to be. So this is the way that this is going to be put together with these lights. Now you want to make sure that you've got at least 1/2 inch on all sides so you can have a seam allowance to put your border on. So I'm making all this at least 1/2 inch inside the edge of the fabric. And we need to determine which colors need to go where. That's going to be our next design kind of structural process. But let me tell you a little bit about this bias tape. Now, like I said, when you're making the bias tape and you are making it 1/4 of an inch, it can be a little difficult to deal with because, like I said, when you first make it, it's nice and crisp and it's holding its folds. But somehow, if you're not going to be putting it on right then, you've got to figure out how to keep it that way. Now, if you use an applique glue to hold those folded pieces down, because what this is looking like, let's see if we can take just a little piece of paper, and I wanted to show you. With this bias tape, we've got 1/2 inch of fabric. And what we've done is we've folded 1/8 of an inch in and 1/8 of an inch in, so that now we've got 1/4 of an inch here, and then 2 little arms, 2 little wings. And we've folded those, and we want that to stay. So we press it, and maybe we used a little bit of steam to hold it in place. Maybe you used a little bit of starch. Now, if you've pressed one and you add starch later, what will happen is you've got it pressed and you spray that starch, and as that fabric starts absorbing that starch, these start unfolding. So be wary of that. You want to make sure that you starch it and you get that iron on it, and you hold it there long enough that you can dry most of that starch and it will hold it. But it's not going to hold it forever. It's not going to hold it long term. You've either got to figure out a way to roll it around something or fold it around something so you're folding those creases and you're kind of holding it until you can do it. Alternatively, you may find that, like I did, is I made it and I had to go back and press it again. And once I pressed it that second time, I immediately brought it over and glued it down in little sections. And that worked the best for me. To glue it down, I definitely used the applique glue. Like I said earlier, I tried to use this. It was frustrating to use, and as I started putting it down on the fabric, what I realized was that the tape does not have the ability to turn the corners like the bias fabric does, even without the paper liner. And that 1/4 inch adhesive layer, see if we pull that back. So you've got an adhesive tape here and a paper liner. That adhesive is sometimes wider than the bias tape, because if you're making a curve, you're going to be pulling in some areas of that bias tape against the fabric, and it makes it just a little bit skinnier. I didn't like this. I think the concept is great. I think if you had a bias tape that was wider than 1/4 inch, then this might be really helpful, because it could be that you could place it right in the fold where these two fold together on a wider bias tape, and it may hold better, and you may also be able to turn your corners and your curves better because it's a wider bias and you're not expecting it to make really sharp turns. So I ended up putting this on with the applique glue. I took all of that tape off. I think there was one little place that I didn't realize it was still there. And let me see if I can show you that. That's right here. And see, we've got these two little curves. This curve is glued on. This curve is taped on, and you can see how that's wanting to stand up. It doesn't lay flat, and that's because that tape is under there. And it may be that we have to go back and take that off. We'll see what happens after we press it, but I don't want to press it until we get our lights glued on and we can take this erasable marker out before we press. So here's our design for our cord. And then what I'm going to do is I used one of these little pieces for the one end of the cord, and then I'll use another one for the other end, and then I took a very small piece of the bias and folded it in half again to create a 1/8 inch bias tape. And I'm going to clip this in half and sew this in for the little plugs, the actual little prongs outside the plugs. So we're going to deal with that a little bit later. I'll put it there for safekeeping. Hope we don't lose it. And we're going to move forward. So let's talk about how these are going to go together. Now I do know that we're going to have this one here and this one here. Those two I do know for sure. So let's go ahead and put those in place. Now you want to make sure that your background is smooth. It's not going to be wrinkle free because we can't iron it until we get those marks out. You don't want to take the chance of it setting in permanently. We're just going to dot all the way around. Oh, back to the bias for just a minute. When I put the glue in, In some places, my glue got too close to the edge of my bias, and it was very hard to sew it. I used a little invisible stitch like I would for binding to stitch down all of those wires. And that was the only difficulty I ran into, was that some areas it was hard to sew through that. And it was exceedingly hard to sew through that little section with the tape. The needle wanted to stick on it. It didn't want to flow through well. Okay, so there we've got that light on. Let's do this one too while we're here. I'm trying to keep that glue in this back section. And that one's going to go right here. And I tried to line that up so that's in the center. And it comes here where you can see both of those wires coming out like you would. Now, I want to point out something. On this green one, it's particularly noticeable. But you see there's some little dab marks here. And there's two things going on. First of all, there's a little shadow here, and that's from the starch. My starch in the first go-round was a little bit strong, had a little too much starch, not quite enough water. So it wanted to leave evidence that it had been there. And then the darker marks are the glue underneath. Now both the starch and the glue are water soluble. So when I get these glued on and sewed on, what I'll do is come back with a, not a wet, not like a sopping wet, but kind of a damp rag, and I'll dot those, and it should come out without problem. But you will see a little bit of that on some fabrics. It seemed to show up more than others. So I think you can see here how we're doing that. And then I think, for example, maybe these might go on here. And you can see how that is in the little tangle. And then we have kind of a variety of shapes going on with these. But that's going to be what this is going to be like. So that's how our design is looking. It's stinking cute, isn't it? And so simple, just so simple. Now, this is a very versatile piece that you could use for a lot of applications in your Christmas. We could even use it for other things as well. But I think this is just going to be adorable. And it's so versatile in what it could be used for. I'm making a table runner. But if you were making a quilt, let's say you're making a full-size quilt, you could use this same design to make the border around a quilt. Or you could use it to make placemats or mug rugs. You could use it to make a Christmas tree skirt. So many applications for this particular design. But today I'm going to leave you here where we are. Let me tell you about what I'm going to do. This is going to be a 2-episode series. While we're away, I'm going to go ahead and position all of my lights. I've got 3 more I need to make. I'm going to get them glued into place and applique stitch on. Now the applique stitch, if you're not familiar with that, I want you to think about it the way you might hem a pair of pants, or you might sew things together where you don't want your sewing to show. So you're going to use a stitch that is virtually invisible from the front. And that could mean doing this with matching color threads if you are a beginner at that. You could use a very light gray for all of these colors, and it would blend in, and you probably wouldn't see it if you were a moderately experienced stitcher with that stitch. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my bulbs done. I'm going to glue these in place and stitch them down by hand. And then when we come back, we'll have it pressed and then move forward with sandwiching, quilting and doing our binding. So we're going to wrap this up in 2 episodes so that if you're interested in doing it, go check out your stash and see what kind of fabrics you can use. This piece is pretty small. Let me give you some dimensions so if you're looking for fabrics, you can get that out the way. I think if you have a piece of fabric that is 5 inches by 6 inches, you're going to have plenty for that. And I'm using 12. You can use any number that you want to use. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, if you've learned something from it, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to share us with a friend. Be sure to subscribe. And we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.